This is a series of 6 paintings that I've done since November 2020. That was during the period of the lockdowns, COVID, the invasion of Ukraine, and until literally last week when I finished the last one. The first of these paintings is called Lockdown. This I painted in November 2020. It's on a monumental scale, about 4 by 9 meters and comprising 6 canvases that interrelate. I wanted to show each of us living in our separate units during lockdown, an unprecedented thing in world history that the whole world was shut down like that at one go. That's never happened before. And I wanted to paint that because I think it's a really crucial image and icon of our time period. I really believe art needs to be relevant to its own time. And I really wanted to produce an image of that whole world in lockdown, but also on a very personal level, what each of us was doing in our own little unit during that time. So if you have a look at each of these houses or boxes, different activities are taking place in each of them, whether it's exercising, reading, being on Zoom, arguing, talking, sleeping, and all the various things we did during that extraordinary period. And they all come together, these little boxes, but in the sky, it's almost like a night sky of stars where you have this reflection and this activity or inactivity taking place over the entire world. And that was really an extraordinary image to try and capture. At around the same time, I painted the second of these works that's titled Pandemic. Now, pandemic, in the middle of this composition, there's a radiating sun or COVID-like shape. But each element of this, each atom, if you like, is made out of a human being. And as these human beings, in a way, heat up, they then spread outward as a kind of force of nature radiating outwards, which is what I feel the pandemic was. Obviously tragic in the sense that so many millions suffered and died in the process. It was an unstoppable force, but an invisible unstoppable force. That's a real challenge to paint something that's invisible, but utterly cataclysmic, taking over the entire world. In that process of painting each figure as they radiate outwards, I was able to experiment with all kinds of different permutations, distortions, and variants, if you like, of shape and form, which was relevant to what was going on in the world, but also artistically the idea of creating these uncanny forms, human forms, as they blow outwards and take over the entire universe. And that's a very, very powerful subject, a frightening subject, a profound subject, and something that you can really experiment with. And all of these paintings were at the same time attempts to experiment with real colour and light. There's a great deal of experimentation in that regard. The third of these paintings I called Bubble. If you look closely, it's a map of the entire globe. But each country is composed of hundreds or thousands or even millions of bubbles. At the time, we were hearing the language of support bubbles. We were all living in our support bubbles. And that was the influence behind that. So if you look closely, each bubble has a family or individual or group of people inside that bubble. So we're all separated, but all connected worldwide. As I was painting this painting, it sparked off actually a series of other paintings, all comprised of bubbles. Of course, a bubble is terribly beautiful. It reminds me of humanity itself because it's beautiful and reflective, but at the same time, ultimately fragile. It can pop in an instant. So it's a real memento mori in the sense, that motif of the bubble. And at the time, I constructed all kinds of compositions and forms out of that basic atom, that atomic structure. So it created a whole new language of painting for me. The next painting I called The New Normal. We were beginning to come out of COVID, out of lockdowns. And so you have here a large perspective with these bubbles moving into the future. I used as a kind of model for this historical paintings where perspective has a great impact. For example, Leonardo's Last Supper, where you have these very, very dramatic lines of perspective. But here I've separated each unit of individuals, of people, into groups within their own bubbles. This painting has a great deal to do with experimenting with colour, light and form, because you have complementary colours such as the purples and yellows then you have the oranges and blues. And those colours are then set off by the image of the bubble, which is reflective and pushed out greatly by these background colours. I wanted that to be really an image of, we're in those support bubbles, we've experienced this, but we're moving forward into a future that has, if you like, a very positive and optimistic note. This element of the journey, this great journey that we've all been through collectively as humanity, which is something that's never happened before. And I really feel that it's the duty and job of artists to kind of mark periods in time as and when they happen. So that's something to look back to. The next painting is titled Invasion. That's a very large painting. It's 4 meters by 777 centimeters. It's unashamedly a war painting or a protest painting, and I deliberately made it exactly the same size, or length at least, as Picasso's great war painting Guernica, which is a kind of tongue-in-cheek comment that actually we're living through a time now that may have certain connections with the 30s. In the sense that there's this invasion that none of us expected, that feels like something from the past, from past history, from pre-war aggression. In the painting itself, the overall composition has this backlit element. You have this red, orange and yellow, and the overall composition reminds you of a big pane of shattered glass. You have all these jagged forms. Then if you look quite closely, you have all this imagery, creatures that look like dinosaurs stomping across into the landscape, invading, and then human figures, one of which has a hollow mind in which a nuclear explosion is taking place. As all these attack elements enter the country and bombard, you can see bombarded and burning towers in the background, you have people fleeing from the city, which is based on Kiev, and you have all these cars and coaches escaping the city. And then that's reflected in the sky too, where you have all kinds of mythical creatures as well as angels, which is actually the symbol of Ukraine, the angelic figure. But you also have all these masks invading, the idea of the aggression taking place there. When I painted this image of the invasion, I had in mind that invasion in a general sense, any time a human being tries to encroach on the territory of another, it's a form of invasion, a form of rape, attacking and overtaking an unwilling land. If you look at the top of the painting, in the middle, there's 2 figures. These are 2 mothers overlooking the whole scene, mothers from both sides. The mothers are always the ultimate victims of any kind of crisis of this nature. So this is in a way a testament to the love of mothers for their children. The last of these paintings is called The Queue. This is a very recent painting. As you can see, it's very, very much about colour, light and shadows. The shadows dominate greatly. I often think that every painting that you do based on a moment in time in history is almost like a shadow of that time, a way of trying, however difficult it is, to capture some shadow of what it felt like to live through that moment. And all these paintings are that to a certain degree. This queue is clearly influenced by the remarkable sight going through Westminster of seeing hundreds of thousands of people waiting in line to see the Queen lying in state. And although that's a very particular historical moment, for me, it was a more universal subject, because there's something profoundly moving about seeing so many people just waiting quietly for a shared purpose. And I often think of the famous line of Milton, "They also serve who only stand and wait." And that imagery of people waiting and their shadows thrown out is something of great value to an artist, I would say, because that's kind of what we do all the time.